So let's start off with what is menopause. Menopause is defined as that complete cessation of the menstrual cycle for a period of about 12 months. Now that's a tricky definition only because, as many women can attest to, sometimes they don't have their menstrual cycle to go by. I can't tell you how many patients I've had where I've tried to gauge where they might be with their menstrual cycles, and they'll say, I've either had a hysterectomy or they're on hormone replacement therapy or some other medications that could impact their cycle, and they're not able to use that as an appropriate gauge. In those cases, we are left with either other symptoms that might guide us. There are some laboratory tests that can sometimes help guide us in the right direction. An FSH, which is a follicle stimulating hormone. The FSH can be elevated persistently for over 3 months, and that can tell us that somebody's probably in menopause as well, or at least heading closer towards it. FSH is a hormone released by our brain to act on the ovaries to release estrogen. The estrogen produced by the ovaries will feed back negatively to the brain for the FSH and lower the FSH levels. If there's not a lot of estrogen being produced by the ovaries, then the FSH level will remain elevated. And that can be our sign or clue that not enough estrogen is there to actually drop the FSH, which means or implies that maybe the ovaries are not able to produce it. Now, what is perimenopause? Perimenopause is not well defined, and even though the average age of onset in this country for menopause is thought to be around 51, perimenopause is poorly defined, and it's really just defined as that window of time leading up to menopause where women will start to experience some symptoms. This is where I find that my expertise in dermatology has really helped quite a bit. There are a lot of vasomotor symptoms that women will experience that can be an indication of hormonal changes. Many of these will have manifestations on our skin that can be a very key clue as to where we're at hormonally speaking. Probably the first one I tend to see is adult acne, and that tends to manifest in our mid to late 30s and progress through the 40s. The one we're going to talk about in this video is hair loss in particular. It's interesting about hair loss that a lot of women just don't realize is that it starts off as what we call hair miniaturization, or a finer, wispier quality to our hair that then, as time progresses into hair loss. By recognizing that earlier sign, that change in the quality of your hair, a lot of women may not realize that their hair's texture is changing, the shine is changing, sometimes the manageability of it is changing, the frizz properties to it start to evolve. These are signs of that hormonal shift that might be occurring. So what exactly is happening? Let's start with the scalp hair in particular. As our estrogen levels gradually decline, what we'll notice is that our testosterone levels, the male hormone that both men and women both produce, does stay relatively constant and only gradually declines over time. There is actually a changeover where testosterone will start to act unopposed. As estrogen levels drop, that testosterone will act unopposed and lead to changes in our skin and hair that we might notice as that hair thinning, the quality changing, breakouts might occur, adult acne might occur, but again, hair loss will occur as well. There are multiple variants of female pattern hair loss, only because the impact of testosterone on our hair can vary from person to person. The classic version of it will be that the top of the scalp, the crown, will start to thin and we'll start to notice less hair. The hair part seems wider. When your hair is wet from sweating or swimming, you can see your scalp directly, and that can be very frustrating for a lot of women. What's very interesting about it is that the scalp hairline, the actual hairline itself, tends to be retained. So we'll find those wispy hairs along the frontal scalp and that thinning along the top of the scalp. Estrogen around in the underarms and in the pubic area, women will notice that the hair also gets thinner. Along the upper lip and chin, however, this can be very frustrating for many women. Chin hair tends to be a result of unopposed testosterone acting on those hairs, turning them in from vellus hairs, which are those fine peach fuzz-like hairs that we all have all over our skin, into what we refer to as terminal hairs, which are those thicker, coarser hairs. What's always frustrating about those hairs is not only are they coarse, they are darker. Sometimes they can be white and they can be very wiry in their thickness. They will catch women off guard because they'll find that they pluck them in the morning and by the afternoon they tend to recur. And as aggressive as they might be about trying to treat some of them, they find that more and more come over time. Recognizing the role that that hormonal shift is playing offers us some therapeutic options to intervene for women that are looking for options to control this. Before moving on to treatments, let's talk about what types of hair loss can occur during menopause but are not necessarily hormonally related. The first one to discuss is something called frontoparietal alopecia. This is a type of hair loss that occurs along the frontal scalp and right down the sides as well. It can have what I call a hairband distribution. A lot of patients I have that have this form of hair loss will start to wear their bangs a little bit longer, trying to pull them over their forehead to camouflage this area. Now, although this type of hair loss occurs primarily in menopausal women, it is not necessarily linked to menopause itself, and there's very little data to understand why this type of hair loss can occur. But again, accurate diagnosis is key, and pattern recognition can help. Another type of hair loss is alopecia areata, traditionally known as hair loss in circles. However, it can be diffuse as well. This type of hair loss is also identifiable by its characteristic patterns, and if it's diffuse, sometimes a biopsy may be helpful to accurately diagnose it. And lastly, a type of hair loss called lichen planopilaris. This, in addition to frontoparietal alopecia, can be scarring in nature, and identifying it not only by its pattern of distribution, but also by some characteristic features such as erythema surrounding the base of each hair follicle and some scaling as well, and perhaps even symptoms for some of our patients. It's important to differentiate these three types of hair loss from the female pattern type of hair loss only because the treatment options may vary, or there might be accessory treatments necessary to achieve better results. Moving on to therapeutic intervention, it really is important to make sure that that initial diagnosis of female pattern hair loss is made, because these interventions are primarily focused on that type of hair loss. We start off basically with progressive therapy. I tend to start with topical therapy, minoxidil over-the-counter solution known as Rogaine, or some people have been opting for a natural alternative called rosemary oil to also address hair loss. Although rosemary oil does not compare to the higher strengths of minoxidil, it has been shown to have some therapeutic comparability to the lower strengths of minoxidil. So for those people that are eager to seek an option that's more natural, it's not unreasonable to apply. Next, however, if we want to consider oral medication in conjunction with discussion with your dermatologist to see which option is best for you, bearing in mind that these medications have other side effects or potential interactions with other medications that you might be on. Now, these medications work by primarily focusing on the hormonal aspects of hair loss, especially for women. Spironolactone is one that I tend to prefer starting with if there are no contraindications in our patients. It's one that works as an androgen blocker, although its primary indication is still an antihypertensive medication. Although it works to drop blood pressure, the dosages we tend to see results for hair loss tend to be lower than those for blood pressure management. Because it is a blood pressure medication, however, we have to be very cautious and work together with primary care doctors or cardiologists to ensure that our patients tolerate it well. The next option is also an oral antihypertensive medication called minoxidil, which has been showing some great results, but again, in conjunction with a cardiologist or primary care doctor, we can consider an intervention of this nature, also bearing in mind that there is a risk of unwanted hair growth with this medication. And in postmenopausal women, oral finasteride has shown some benefit too in some small studies, and in clinical practice we have seen some results as well, but again with caution. In terms of scalp injections, there is some limited data that shows that Kenalog, a steroid in low concentrations, may help some women with female pattern hair loss, but this does not seem to be working for male pattern hair loss. It's hard to say why this may be of benefit, and it does not help all women, but may be of some benefit in women experiencing any symptoms with their hair loss, such as itching or inflammation. Injections of PRP are something that our patients often ask us about, and in select candidates, there may be some benefit here, but again, the results might be variable, and these treatments do need to be consistently maintained to continue to see results. In terms of surgical intervention, I do strongly recommend that my patients consider hair transplants, only because there is a psychosocial element for those that have experienced a tremendous amount of hair loss that are seeking faster results. And it is true with any topical or oral medication, we may not see these results as quickly as they may hope. So sometimes considering a surgical intervention can jumpstart the process to see this hair growth rather quickly. In terms of laser and light therapy options, it's hard to say how beneficial these might be. There is very little data supporting their use. In 20 years of practice, I have yet to come across a patient who has found successful intervention for their hair loss with one of these devices. However, it may exist because, again, I only see patients that are seeking further therapeutic intervention. In terms of supplements, I do not tend to recommend these routinely in patients unless they are actually experiencing a vitamin deficiency. And I do tend to recommend that my patients have these evaluated because I've come across so many cases of hypervitaminoses or excess vitamin intake that has its own consequences, that it's very important to make sure that when a supplement is taken, it's specifically addressing an actual deficiency to see results.